The dust hung thick in the afternoon ere the day Cole Bennett saw her standing in the corral with nothing but raw courage between her and 1,500 pounds of wild fury, her feet bare against the sun-baked earth, and something shifted in his chest like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. He had ridden into the small settlement of Redemption, New Mexico Territory, on a scorching July afternoon in 1883. His horse weary from the long trail drive up from Texas, his pockets finally heavy with honest pay after 3 months of pushing cattle through dust storms and across swollen rivers. Cole had planned to spend a few days resting, maybe play some cards, drink some whiskey that didn't taste like kerosene, and then move on like he always did. At 26 years old, he had spent the better part of a decade drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, never putting down roots because roots meant staying in one place long enough to feel the weight of loneliness, and Cole had convinced himself that a man who kept moving never had to face what he was running from. But then he saw her, and every plan he had made evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. She stood in the center of a makeshift corral built from rough-hewn timber, her dark hair hanging in a thick braid down her back, wearing a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, the hem dusty and frayed. The wild Mustang circling her was a magnificent creature, coat the color of desert sand with a black mane that whipped like storm clouds as he tossed his head and snorted his defiance. The horse's eyes showed white with fear and rage, hooves striking the ground hard enough to send up clouds of dust with each agitated step. Cole had stopped at the edge of the corral without meaning to, one boot on the lowest rail, his arms draped over the top fence post, completely transfixed. There were maybe a dozen other people watching, ranch hands and townspeople who had come out to see the spectacle, but Cole barely noticed them. His entire focus had narrowed to the woman in the center of that ring, and the dangerous dance she was performing with an animal that could kill her with one well-placed kick. "Easy now," she said, her voice carrying across the corral despite being barely above a conversational tone. "Nobody here wants to hurt you. You're safe. You're safe." The Mustang reared up, front hooves pawing the air, and several people in the crowd gasped. Cole's hand instinctively went to the rail, ready to vault over and pull her to safety, but she didn't flinch. She didn't move at all except to turn slightly, keeping her body angled away from the horse, her posture relaxed despite the very real danger she was in. "That's right," she continued in that same calm, almost musical voice. "You go ahead and show me how strong you are, I already know. I can see it in every line of you. You're powerful and fast and you have every right to be afraid. They caught you and penned you up, took away your freedom, and that's a terrible thing. But I'm not them. I'm not going to break you. I'm just asking you to trust me." Cole watched, barely breathing as she slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged in the dirt, making herself small and unthreatening. The Mustang continued to circle, but his movements were becoming less frantic, more curious. She began to hum, a low melody that seemed to drift on the hot breeze, and Cole felt it resonate somewhere deep in his bones. Time seemed to stretch and slow. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down Cole's spine beneath his shirt, but he couldn't have moved if his life depended on it. The woman sat perfectly still, humming that wordless tune, letting the horse take his time, letting him come to his own conclusions. It must have been 20 minutes before the Mustang finally approached her, taking tentative steps, nostrils flaring as he tried to catch her scent. She remained motionless except to extend one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. The horse stretched his neck forward, and Cole saw the moment their connection formed as clearly as if it were a visible thing, a golden thread spinning out between woman and beast. The Mustang's nose touched her palm, his warm breath stirring the dust on her skin, and then he was lowering his great head, allowing her to stroke the white blaze that ran down his face. "There you are," she whispered. "There's my brave boy." Cole heard someone beside him let out a long breath and realized the entire crowd had been holding their collective breath. Slowly, the woman rose to her feet, never breaking contact with the horse, her hand sliding along his neck, fingers tangling gently in his mane. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder and stood there, just breathing with him, and Cole felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had kept carefully locked away for so long he had almost forgotten it was there. "Who is she?" he asked the man standing next to him, a grizzled ranch hand with more wrinkles than teeth. "That's Josephine Wright," the man said, his tone mixing admiration with something that might have been concern. "Joe, most folks call her. Showed up about 8 months ago with her younger brother, bought that little piece of land on the eastern edge of town. She's got a gift with horses, that's for damn certain, but she's also got a stubborn streak a mile wide. Won't let nobody help her, won't take charity, works herself near to death trying to make that ranch profitable." "Her husband doesn't mind her working with wild horses?" Cole asked, though something told him he already knew the answer. The ranch hand shook his head. "No husband. No parents either, from what I understand. Just her and the boy, Daniel. He's about 14, 15 maybe. Good kid, works hard, but he doesn't have his sister's touch with the animals. Joe does all the horse breaking and training herself." Cole watched as she led the Mustang around the corral in a slow walk, the animal following her like a devoted puppy, despite the fact that he had been wild and free just minutes before. Her bare feet left prints in the dust, and Cole found himself wondering what kind of woman chose to work without boots, whether it was poverty or preference, and then decided it didn't matter because either way, she was the most remarkable person he had ever seen. She taking on help? Cole heard himself ask before his brain could catch up with his mouth. The ranch hand gave him a skeptical look. "You could ask, I suppose. She's turned down about every able-bodied man in 3 counties, but maybe you'll have better luck. She's trying to fill a contract for the Army, needs 30 broken and trained horses by the end of September. That's a tall order for one person, even someone with her skills." The crowd was dispersing now, people heading back to their own business, the show apparently over. But Cole stayed where he was, watching as Josephine Wright secured the Mustang in a smaller pen with fresh water and hay. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of exhaustion and determination in equal measure. Her shoulders set in a straight line despite the way her dress clung to her back with sweat. When she finally turned and walked toward the corral gate, she saw him standing there and their eyes met for the first time. Hers were the color of honey in sunlight, flecked with gold and green, set in a face that was more handsome than pretty, all strong bones and sun-browned skin. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, but there was something ancient in her gaze, a weariness that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person alone. "Something I can help you with, Cowboy?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of the South, maybe Georgia or Alabama, softened by years away from home. Cole pulled his hat off, suddenly aware that his hair was probably standing up in 6 different directions and he smelled like trail dust and horse. "Name's Cole Bennett, ma'am. I just finished a drive up from Texas and I'm looking for work. Heard you might be needing a hand." She studied him for a long moment, those remarkable eyes taking in every detail, and Cole had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through him, past all the walls he had built, right down to the scared, lonely kid he had been when he first left home at 16. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Room and board and $20 a month if I make the Army contract. If I don't, well, you'll have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day, but that's about all I can promise." "That's fair," Cole said, though he had been making twice that on the cattle drive. Money wasn't why he was asking, though he couldn't have explained what was pulling him to stay if someone had put a gun to his head. Josephine wiped her hands on her dress and extended one to him. "Joe Wright. Welcome to the Broken Bit Ranch, Mr. Bennett. When can you start?" Her hand was small in his, rough with calluses, strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with the will that burned behind those honey-colored eyes. Cole felt that strange turning sensation in his chest again, that feeling of something fundamental shifting in his understanding of the world and his place in it. "How about right now?" he said. The corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I like your attitude, Cowboy. Come on, I'll show you where you can stable your horse and get you settled in the bunkhouse. It's not much, but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak too badly." Cole followed her across the dusty yard toward a small barn that looked like it had been built with more determination than skill. The whole property had that scrappy, held together with hope-hand baling wire look that he recognized from his own childhood on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri. The main house was a simple adobe structure with a covered porch. The barn was weathered gray wood, and there were a series of corrals in various states of repair spreading out across the property. In the distance, he could see a handful of horses grazing in a larger pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. "How many head you got?" he asked. 22 at the moment," Joe said, leading him into the barn. It was blessedly cool inside, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. 15 that are broken and ready for sale, 5 that are in various stages of training, and that Mustang out there, who I just call Ghost because he's been slipping out of every rope and trap for the past 6 months. Took me 3 tries to finally catch him. Your horse can have this stall here. There's feed in the bin, water in the trough. I ask that everyone on this ranch takes care of their own animals before anything else. A man who won't look after his horse won't look after much of anything, in my experience. Cole couldn't argue with that philosophy. He led his gelding, a steady bay named Copper, into the stall and began removing his saddle and tack. Joe leaned against the stall door watching him work, and he was conscious of her scrutiny in a way that made him both nervous and strangely pleased. "You know much about breaking horses?" she asked. "Some," Cole said, hoisting his saddle onto a rack. "Nothing like what I saw you do out there, though. Where'd you learn to work like that?" Something shuddered in her expression, a door closing on memories she didn't want to share. "Here and there. My father had a way with animals. I guess I inherited some of that from him." The past tense wasn't lost on Cole, but he didn't press. Everyone out here had a story, and most of those stories involved loss of one kind or another. That was the nature of the West, beautiful and brutal in equal measure, taking as much as it gave. "I'll do my best not to disappoint you, ma'am," he said. "It's Joe," she corrected. "And I have a feeling you're going to work out just fine, Cole Bennett. I'm a pretty good judge of character and you've got honest eyes. That counts for a lot in my book." She pushed off from the stall door and gestured for him to follow her back outside. "Bunkhouse is over there. Like I said, nothing fancy, but you'll have your own room and privacy. Daniel and I are in the main house. Breakfast is at sunrise, lunch is noon, dinner is whenever we finish work for the day. I expect a full day's work, but I won't run you into the ground. Questions?" Cole had about 1,000 questions, but none of them were about the work. He wanted to know where she had come from, and what had brought her to this harsh land with nothing but a teenage brother and a dream too big for one person to carry alone. He wanted to know who had taught her to gentle horses like she was speaking their secret language. He wanted to know if she had any idea how beautiful she had looked standing barefoot in that corral, fearless and fierce and so completely herself that it made his heart ache with a longing he couldn't name. Instead, he just shook his head. "No, ma'am, Joe. I think I've got everything I need to know for now. Good. Go ahead and get settled, wash up if you want. The pump is around the back of the bunkhouse. I'll finish up the evening feeding and then get started on dinner. You can join us in the house when you hear the bell." She walked away before he could respond, her braids swinging between her shoulder blades, her bare feet knowing every dip and rise in the yard without having to look. Cole stood there watching her go, Copper's reins still in his hand, and wondered what in the hell he had just gotten himself into. The bunkhouse was, as promised, simple but clean. There were 4 small rooms off a central common area that held a table, a few chairs, and a wood stove that would be essential come winter. Cole chose the room furthest from the door, a habit born of years of sleeping light in places where trouble could come from any direction. The room contained a narrow bed with a simple rope frame, a small table, and a chair. There was a window that looked out over the eastern pasture, and a peg on the wall for hanging his hat and coat. He had slept in far worse places, and at least here the walls were solid and there were no scorpions or rattlesnakes sharing his quarters. He unpacked his few belongings, his extra shirt and pants, his shaving kit, the small leather pouch that held everything he owned of value in the world, which amounted to his mother's wedding ring and a photograph of his family taken before everything fell apart. He set these items carefully in the table drawer and then went outside to wash up at the pump. The water was cold despite the heat of the day, probably pulled from deep underground, and it felt like heaven on his dusty skin. Cole stripped off his shirt and doused his head and chest, scrubbing away the grime of the trail, and when he straightened up, water streaming down his face, he saw a young man watching him from across the yard. The boy was tall and gangly, all arms and legs like a newborn colt, with the same dark hair and honey-colored eyes as his sister. He couldn't have been more than 15, but there was something older in the set of his jaw, the way he held himself ready for trouble. Cole recognized that stance because he had worn it himself at that age, after his own world had fallen apart and he learned that safety was an illusion, and the only person you could truly count on was yourself. "You must be Daniel," Cole said, reaching for his shirt. The boy nodded slowly. "And you're the new hand, Cole, right?" "That's right." Cole pulled on his shirt and walked over, extending his hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Daniel's handshake was firm, his palms as calloused as his sister's. "Joe says you're from Texas. You worked cattle most of my life, one way or another. But I know my way around horses, too. Your sister's taking a chance on me, and I aim to prove her right." Something in Daniel's expression softened slightly, though he still maintained that wary distance. "Joe's a good judge of character, but she's also got a habit of trusting people who don't deserve it. You hurt her or let her down, you'll answer to me. I don't care how much bigger you are." Cole had to admire the kid's protective instinct, even as he recognized the futility of a 15-year-old threatening a grown man. "Fair enough. I have no intention of doing either, but I respect you for saying it straight out. Your sister's lucky to have you watching her back." "She's all I got," Daniel said simply. "Our folks are dead, it's just us now. She's been carrying this whole place on her shoulders, working herself sick trying to make this ranch profitable so we can stay here and not have to go back east to our uncle's house. She won't admit she needs help, but she does. So if you're really here to work and not just to get close to her because she's pretty, then I'm glad you're here." The bell rang before Cole could formulate a response to that, a clear brass sound that carried across the yard. Daniel turned and headed toward the main house without waiting to see if Cole would follow. Cole stood there for a moment, letting the boy's words settle into his understanding of the situation. Joe Wright wasn't just running a ranch and breaking horses because she loved the work. She was fighting for survival, for a future for herself and her brother, and probably against a whole world of people who thought a woman had no business trying to do what she was doing. The dining room of the main house was simple but welcoming, with a long wooden table that could seat 6, walls painted a soft yellow that caught the evening light, and curtains at the windows that might have been flour sacks but had been embroidered with careful stitches to make them something more. Joe was setting out plates of food, simple fare but plentiful, beans and cornbread and some kind of meat stew that smelled like heaven. Her face was flushed from the heat of the stove, and she had changed into a different dress, this one a faded blue that brought out the gold in her eyes. "Sit anywhere," she said, gesturing to the table. "We don't stand on ceremony around here." Cole took a seat across from Daniel, and Joe settled at the head of the table between them. She bowed her head and said a brief grace, thanking God for the food and the hands that prepared it, for the work they had been given and the strength to do it. Cole found himself studying her profile in the lamplight, The straight line of her nose, the curve of her lips, the small scar that traced a pale line along her jawbone. And he wondered what story that scar told and whether she would ever trust him enough to share it. "So, Cole," Joe said, passing him the cornbread, "tell us a bit about yourself. Where you from originally?" "Missouri," Cole said, accepting the plate. "Little farming town you never heard of. Left when I was 16 and have been working ranches and cattle drives ever since." "Texas, mostly, but I've been up through Kansas and Colorado too. No family left to speak of, no ties holding me anywhere in particular." "That sounds lonely," Joe said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made Cole look up and meet her eyes. She wasn't judging him or pitying him, just stating a fact with the understanding of someone who knew what loneliness looked like from the inside. "It can be," Cole admitted. "But it's also got its freedoms. I go where I want, work when I want, answer to nobody but myself." "And yet here you are, signing on for $20 a month and room and board," Joe said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Something tells me you could get better pay somewhere else if money was all you cared about." Cole found himself smiling despite himself. "You're not wrong. But I saw something this afternoon that I've never seen before. The way you worked with that Mustang, it was like watching magic. I figured anyone who could do that might have something to teach me, and I'm always willing to learn." Joe's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at her plate. "It's not magic, it's just patience and understanding. Horses are like people, they respond to kindness and respect. You can break them with force, but then all you've got is a broken thing. I'd rather have a partner than a slave." "That's a good philosophy," Cole said. "For horses and people both, I'd imagine." They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Cole found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around new people. There was something comfortable about this house, this table. These two people who were clearly as wary of the world as he was but were still trying to build something good in spite of it. By the time Joe served dessert, a dried apple pie that tasted like summer despite the fact that it was full summer outside, Cole had made a decision he didn't entirely understand but knew was right in his bones. He was going to help Joe Wright make this ranch succeed, not just because he had signed on to work, but because she deserved to have someone in her corner who wasn't going to let her down. The next morning came early, the sky still dark with just a hint of gray on the eastern horizon when Cole heard the bell ring. He dressed quickly and headed to the main house, where he found Joe already in the kitchen, her hair in that long braid again, wearing the same worn dress from yesterday. She handed him a cup of coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint, and a warm biscuit filled with bacon and eggs. "We'll eat a proper breakfast after the horses are fed," she said. "But this will hold you over. Come on, daylight's wasting." Cole followed her out to the barn, the coffee warming his hands, the pre-dawn air still holding a hint of coolness that would burn away as soon as the sun climbed above the horizon. Daniel was already there, moving through the stalls with practiced efficiency, distributing hay and grain, checking water troughs. The horses nickered and shifted, the soft sounds of animals waking to a new day, and Cole felt something in his chest ease, a tension he hadn't known he was carrying until it was gone. "I need you to assess the horses in the main training corral," Joe said, leading him to a pen that held 5 animals of various sizes and colors. "I need to know your honest opinion of where they are in their training. Can they be ridden? Are they reliable under saddle? What else do they need before they are ready to sell?" Cole set his coffee on a fence post and climbed into the corral. He had been around horses his entire life, knew their moods and temperaments, could read their body language as easily as some people read books. He spent the next hour working with each animal, first just observing, then approaching, running his hands over them, checking their hooves, testing their responses to basic commands. Joe watched from the fence, and he was conscious of her scrutiny, wanting to prove himself in her eyes in a way that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with that strange pull he felt toward her. "The sorrel mare is solid," he said finally, running his hand down the horse's neck. "She's ready to go today if you need her. The paint gelding is good under saddle but still a little skittish about loud noises. He needs more exposure to things that might spook him, gunfire and such. The black is smart as a whip but has a stubborn streak. He'll test every rider until he decides they're worthy of him. The gray filly is young and needs more time, another few weeks at least. And that bay in the corner, he's got a bad left front hoof that needs attention before he should be worked. Might be an abscess, might be something he picked up in the pasture." Joe nodded slowly, and Cole could see her mentally adjusting her plans, recalculating her timeline. "That matches my assessment pretty closely. Good eye, Mr. Bennett." "Cole," he corrected, echoing her words from yesterday. "Cole," she agreed, and the way she said his name, soft and warm like honey, made something flutter in his chest. The days settled into a rhythm after that, a pattern of work and meals and quiet conversations that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Cole rose with the sun, worked alongside Joe and Daniel until the heat of the day forced them into shade, then worked again in the cooling evening until the chores were done and they could sit down to dinner. He learned that Joe had been raised on a horse farm in Alabama, that her father had been killed in an accident when she was 19, and her mother had died of fever 6 months later, leaving Joe and Daniel alone with nothing but debt. Their uncle had wanted them to come live with him in Philadelphia, wanted to put Daniel in school and find Joe a suitable husband, which in his mind meant a respectable clerk or shopkeeper, who would keep her properly confined to a parlor and a kitchen. "I couldn't do it," Joe told him one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, Daniel having gone to bed. "I couldn't go live in a city, be someone's docile wife, pretend that my dreams didn't matter. I took what little money we had left after selling the farm, bought tickets west, and here we are." "No regrets?" Cole asked. Joe looked out over the darkening land, at the horses moving like shadows in the pasture, at the first stars beginning to appear in the vast sky. "Not a single one. This life is hard, harder than anything I imagined, and there are days when I'm so tired I can barely stand. But it's mine. I'm building something here, something that belongs to me and Daniel, and nobody can take that away from us unless we let them." Cole understood that feeling bone deep, that need for something that was yours alone, that you had built with your own hands and didn't owe to anyone's charity or pity. He had spent 10 years drifting because he was afraid of wanting something so badly that losing it would destroy him. But sitting there on Joe Wright's porch, listening to the night sounds of the desert, he thought maybe it was time to stop being afraid. "You're going to make that army contract," he said. "I'll make sure of it." Joe turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, her eyes were soft and searching. "Why are you really here, Cole? And don't tell me it's just about the work, because we both know that's not entirely true." Cole could have deflected, could have made a joke or changed the subject, but something in him had shifted in the weeks since he had watched her tame that wild Mustang Barefoot in the corral. He was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of pretending that he didn't want more than a succession of temporary jobs and empty nights. "I'm here because the moment I saw you with that Mustang, something in me recognized something in you," he said quietly. "I saw courage and strength and a kind of grace I didn't know existed in this world. I saw a woman who wasn't afraid to be exactly who she was meant to be, and I thought, maybe if I stayed close enough to that light, some of it might rub off on me. Maybe I could learn to be that brave too." Joe's breath caught, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. Then she reached over and took his hand, her fingers threading through his, and Cole felt that touch all the way down to his soul. "You're already braver than you think," she said softly. "It takes courage to stay, Cole. It's easy to keep moving, to never let anyone get close enough to hurt you. But staying, building something, letting yourself care about people and places, that's the hardest thing in the world." They sat there holding hands in the darkness, listening to the coyotes sing their lonely songs to the stars, and Cole thought that maybe, just maybe, he had finally found the place he was meant to be. The work continued, relentless and demanding. Cole spent his days working with the horses that were closest to being finished, exposing them to everything the army might throw at them, teaching them to stand steady for gunfire, to respond to commands even in chaos, to trust their riders completely. Joe worked with the newer acquisitions, bringing in wild Mustangs and half-broke animals from local ranches, working her particular magic on each one. Cole never got tired of watching her work, the way she moved with such confidence and purpose, the way she seemed to communicate with the animals on some level beyond words. He started joining her in the breaking corral, learning her techniques, and was amazed at how much more effective they were than the harsh methods he had seen used on other ranches. "You're a natural at this," Joe said one afternoon after he had successfully completed his first full gentling of a skittish gelding. "Have you ever thought about specializing in horse training instead of cattle work?" "Never really occurred to me," Cole admitted. "But I'm starting to see the appeal. There's something satisfying about taking an animal that's scared and angry and helping them understand that not all humans are their enemies." "That's exactly it," Joe said, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. "That's what most people don't understand. They think breaking a horse means dominating it, crushing its spirit. But a truly well-trained horse isn't broken at all. It's been given a reason to cooperate, a partnership where both sides benefit." They were standing close together in the shade of the barn, and Cole could smell the scent of her, sun-warmed skin and sage, and something uniquely Joe. He wanted to kiss her so badly his hands shook with it, wanted to pull her against him and show her with his body what he was starting to feel in his heart. But he held back, afraid of moving too fast, afraid of presuming too much, afraid of ruining the fragile trust they were building. As if sensing his thoughts, Joe looked up at him, and the expression in her eyes made his breath stop in his chest. There was awareness there and desire, and something deeper that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to either fall or fly. "Cole," she said, and his name on her lips was a question and an answer all at once. He cupped her face in his hands, giving her time to pull away to tell him no, but she didn't. She leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed, and when he finally kissed her, it was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like the coffee they had shared at breakfast and something sweeter beneath that. She made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and Cole wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Joe rested her forehead against his chest. "This is probably a terrible idea," she said, but there was laughter in her voice. "Probably," Cole agreed, running his hand down her braid. "But I can't bring myself to care." "Me neither," Joe admitted. She pulled back enough to look up at him, and her expression had turned serious. "But I need you to understand something, Cole. I'm not looking for a temporary thing. I don't have the time or the heart for something that's going to end when you get restless and decide to move on. If this is happening between us, I need to know that you're in it for the long haul." Cole thought about all the years he had spent running, all the times he had left before anyone could get too close, all the ways he had protected himself from pain by refusing to let himself want anything permanent. And then he thought about the way he felt when he woke up in the morning and knew he would see Joe's smile over breakfast. The satisfaction of working alongside her toward a common goal, the peace he felt sitting on the porch with her in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He thought about the strange certainty he had felt the moment he saw her taming that wild Mustang, the bone-deep knowledge that she was meant for him and he for her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Joe smiled, bright and beautiful and so full of joy that it made his chest ache. And then she kissed him again, and Cole let himself fall into it, into her, into the promise of a future he had never let himself imagine until now. Their relationship developed slowly after that, in stolen moments between work, in long conversations after Daniel had gone to bed, in looks and touches that spoke volumes even when they weren't alone. Cole moved his things into the main house a month later, into Joe's room, into her bed, into her life in a way that felt both terrifyingly vulnerable and absolutely right. They were careful in front of Daniel at first, but the boy was more perceptive than they gave him credit for. "About time you two figured it out," Daniel said one morning at breakfast, his tone casual but his eyes knowing. "I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in the barn together until you admitted you were in love." Joe choked on her coffee and Cole felt his face heat. "Daniel," Joe said, half warning, half embarrassed. "What? I've got eyes, Joe, and I'm not a kid anymore. I think it's good. Cole makes you happy and God knows you deserve to be happy. Just, don't be all mushy in front of me, okay?" Cole found himself laughing despite the awkwardness. "We'll do our best to spare your delicate sensibilities." "Appreciate it," Daniel said with a grin, and just like that, the tension was broken. August arrived with its brutal heat, temperatures soaring over 100 degrees day after day, making work almost unbearable during the afternoon hours. They adjusted their schedule, working in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst of the heat. Cole used the downtime to make repairs around the property, fixing fences, patching the barn roof, building a new water trough. Joe spent her rest time with the account books, carefully tracking every dollar, planning for the future with the kind of meticulous attention that spoke of someone who had learned the hard way that survival was a matter of planning and preparation. They were getting close to finishing the Army contract. 28 horses trained and ready, with another 3 that would be done within the week. The Army inspector was scheduled to arrive in late September to examine the horses and authorize payment, and Joe was a bundle of nervous energy as the date approached. "What if they don't pass inspection?" she asked Cole one evening, pacing the porch like a caged animal. "What if I missed something, or one of them reverts to bad behavior, or the inspector is just in a bad mood and decides to fail us?" Cole caught her hand as she passed, pulling her down to sit beside him. "Then we'll deal with it. But that's not going to happen, Joe. Those horses are some of the best trained animals I've ever seen. You've done everything right, more than right. You have to trust in the work you've done." "I'm trying," Joe said, leaning against him. "It's just this contract represents everything. If we make it, we're solvent. We can pay off the last of our debts, buy supplies for winter, maybe even hire another hand to help with the work. If we don't, I don't know how we're going to make it through to spring." "You're going to make it," Cole said firmly. "And even if the worst happened, which it won't, you wouldn't be facing it alone. You have Daniel and you have me, and we'll figure it out together." Joe turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You really mean that, don't you? You're really staying?" "I really am," Cole said. "In fact, I've been meaning to talk to you about that." He took a deep breath, his heart suddenly pounding. "Joe Wright, I know we haven't been together that long, and I know I'm not much of a catch. I'm a drifter with no property, no money to speak of, and a past full of running away from things instead of facing them. But I love you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. And I want to spend the rest of my life helping you build this ranch, raising horses with you, waking up next to you every morning and going to sleep with you every night. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Joe's eyes filled with tears, and for one horrible moment, Cole thought she was going to say no. But then she was laughing and crying at the same time, throwing her arms around his neck and kissing him so hard they almost fell off the porch bench. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes. I love you too, Cole Bennett. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you offered to stay and help, when every other man in the territory had either tried to court me or told me I was crazy for trying to run this place alone. You saw me, really saw me, and you stayed anyway. Of course I'll marry you." They held each other as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky in colors that seemed to reflect the joy burning in Cole's chest. He had spent so long believing that happiness was something that happened to other people, that he was somehow unworthy of love and belonging. But Joe had shown him that he was wrong, that he was capable of being exactly the kind of man who could build a life with someone, who could be trusted with someone's heart, who could be a partner in every sense of the word. Daniel found them there an hour later, still wrapped up in each other, and when they told him the news, he whooped and hollered loud enough to spook the horses. "Finally! I was starting to think I'd have to propose on your behalf, Cole. When's the wedding?" "Soon," Joe said, smiling so wide her face must have hurt. "As soon as the army inspector comes and we know where we stand financially, I want to get married here on the ranch with just us and maybe a few friends from town." "And a preacher," Daniel added. "Pretty sure you need one of those for it to be legal." "Yes, and a preacher," Joe agreed, laughing. "We'll figure out the details. For now, let's just enjoy this." They told a few people in town over the next week, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The general store owner offered to donate some fabric for a wedding dress. The hotel owner's wife offered to make a cake, and the preacher from the small church in town said he would be honored to perform the ceremony. Cole was touched by the outpouring of support, realized that Joe and Daniel had built a community here without even realizing it, had earned respect and affection through their hard work and honest dealings. The army inspector arrived on a Saturday morning in late September, a stern-faced captain named Morrison who looked like he had never smiled a day in his life. Cole and Joe had the horses lined up and ready, all 30 of them groomed to perfection, their tack polished and their hooves oiled. Daniel stood off to the side, trying to look calm but practically vibrating with nervous energy. Captain Morrison took his time, examining each horse individually, checking teeth and hooves, testing their responses to commands, even firing his pistol to see how they reacted to gunfire. Cole watched Joe's face as the inspection progressed, saw the tension in every line of her body, and wished he could take this burden from her. But this was her triumph to claim, her work that was being judged, and all he could do was stand beside her and silently will the inspector to see what he saw. A collection of horses that were not just well-trained but genuinely well cared for, animals that had been treated with respect and patience, and had responded by becoming the best versions of themselves. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Captain Morrison turned to Joe and removed his hat. "Miss Wright, I have to say, I've inspected a lot of horses in my career, and these are some of the finest I've ever seen. You clearly have a gift for this work. The Army will be pleased to take all 30 horses, and I'll be recommending that we contract with you for future purchases as well." Joe's knees actually buckled, and Cole caught her elbow to steady her. "Thank you, Captain. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to us." "I think I do," Morrison said, and his stern face softened slightly. "I know it's not easy for a woman to make her way in this business, Miss Wright. There are a lot of men who would have tried to take advantage of you or run you out of business entirely. The fact that you've not only survived, but produced work of this quality speaks very highly of your character and skill. Congratulations." He handed over a bank draft for the full amount of the contract, shook hands with Joe and Cole and Daniel, and then supervised the loading of the horses into the wagons he had brought for transport. When the last horse was loaded and the wagons were rolling away down the dusty road, Joe turned to Cole and Daniel and let out a scream of pure joy. "We did it. We actually did it." Daniel picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and Cole felt something warm and perfect settle into his chest. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not some grand dramatic moment, but this, watching the people he loved celebrate a hard-won victory, knowing that he had been part of making it happen. That night, they celebrated with a dinner that was far fancier than their usual fare, steaks that Joe had been saving in the cold cellar, potatoes roasted with herbs from the small garden behind the house, and a bottle of wine that Daniel had somehow acquired from town. They ate and drank and talked about the future, making plans for how to spend the money from the contract, what repairs were most urgent, whether they should buy more horses or focus on training the ones they had. "I think we should hire that extra hand now," Jo said, her cheeks flushed with wine and happiness. "We've proven that the training method works, that there's a real market for what we do. If we can increase our capacity, we can take on bigger contracts, build a real reputation." "Agreed," Cole said. "And I think we should put some money aside for improvements to the house and the barn. If we're going to be working year-round, we need facilities that can handle winter weather." "And maybe we could get a new stove," Daniel added. "The one we've got barely heats water anymore." They talked late into the night, and when Daniel finally stumbled off to bed, Cole and Jo sat together on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds against black velvet. "A month ago, I was terrified we were going to lose everything," Jo said quietly. "And now, because of you, we have a future, a real future." "It's not because of me," Cole protested. "It's because of your skill and your hard work and your refusal to give up even when things looked impossible." "It's because of all of us," Jo said firmly. "Daniel and you and me working together, that's what made this possible. I couldn't have done it alone, Cole. I needed you." Cole kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her. "I needed you too. I just didn't know it until I saw you standing barefoot in that corral, facing down a wild Mustang like you had all the time in the world. You changed everything for me, Jo. You showed me what it meant to be brave enough to stay, to fight for something, to build instead of just drifting." "Then we saved each other," Jo said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And now we get to build a life together." They were married 3 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon in October, when the brutal heat had finally broken, and the air had that crystalline quality that made everything seem sharper and more vivid. Jo wore a simple dress made from the fabric the general store owner had donated, a soft cream color that made her skin glow, and she had wildflowers woven into her hair. Cole wore his best shirt and pants, his boots polished to a shine, and his hands shook as he took Jo's hands in his and repeated the vows that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. "I, Cole Bennett, take you, Josephine Wright, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Jo's eyes were bright with tears as she repeated her own vows, her voice steady and sure. "I, Josephine Wright, take you, Cole Bennett, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Cole kissed Jo, the small crowd of friends and neighbors who had gathered to witness the ceremony erupted into cheers and applause. Daniel was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split, and several of the women were dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. They had a celebration that lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Cole danced with his wife, and the word still felt strange and wonderful in his mind, holding her close as someone played a fiddle and the desert night wrapped around them like a blessing. This was his life now, he realized. This woman, this land, this community. He was no longer a drifter with no ties and no future. He was a husband, a partner, a man who had finally found his place in the world. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Cole made love to his wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Afterward, Jo lay curled against his chest, her hand resting over his heart, and Cole knew that he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. The feeling of her skin against his, the sound of her breathing evening out as she drifted towards sleep, the knowledge that this was just the beginning of their story together. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Jo murmured back, already half asleep. "My brave cowboy who stayed." The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch grew and prospered, their reputation spreading throughout the territory and beyond. They hired 2 more hands, good men who shared their philosophy about horse training and were willing to work hard for honest pay. Daniel grew into a fine young man, learning the business alongside them, developing his own skills and finding his own passion in breeding horses rather than training them. By the time he was 18, he was running a breeding program that produced some of the finest stock in New Mexico. Cole and Joe worked side by side through everything, through drought years when they had to haul water from miles away to keep the horses alive, through harsh winters when they took turns staying up all night to keep fires burning in the barn, through the sudden illness that nearly took Joe from him in their 3rd year of marriage and left Cole praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in to please let her live because he couldn't face a world without her in it. Joe survived, though it took months for her to fully recover, and Cole learned what it meant to be a caretaker as well as a partner, to hold someone's hair back as they were sick, to carry them when they were too weak to walk, to be strong when they needed strength because your own fear was less important than their need for reassurance. Their first child came 4 years into their marriage, a son they named Thomas, after Joe's father. Cole had never imagined himself as a father, had spent most of his life believing he would die alone and unmissed, but holding that tiny, perfect baby in his arms, he felt something shift in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. He was responsible now not just for himself or even for Joe, but for this small life that depended on him completely. It was terrifying and humbling, and the most amazing thing he had ever experienced. Joe was a natural mother, patient and loving and fierce in her protection of their son. She continued working on the ranch throughout her pregnancy and after, carrying Thomas in a sling against her chest as she worked with the horses, teaching him from infancy to be comfortable around the animals that were their livelihood. Cole marveled at her strength, at the way she seemed to take motherhood in stride without losing any of the passion and determination that had first drawn him to her. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's stubborn streak. She was a wild thing from the moment she could walk, fearless and curious and constantly getting into trouble. Cole found himself simultaneously terrified for her safety and deeply proud of her spirit. She reminded him of Joe, that same refusal to be confined or limited by what other people thought she should be. By the time Thomas was 10 and Elizabeth was 8, they were both accomplished riders, both knowledgeable about horses in a way that most adults never achieved. Daniel had married a schoolteacher from town, a smart, practical woman named Sarah who loved the ranch life and fit into their family like she had always been there. They had built a house on the eastern edge of the property, were starting their own family, and Cole looked around at what they had all built together and felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. The ranch, which they had officially renamed the Wright Bennett Horse Farm, was now one of the most respected breeding and training operations in the territory. They had contracts with the Army, with several large ranches, and with private buyers from as far away as California and Texas. Joe had written a series of articles for a national magazine about her training methods, and they had received inquiries from people all over the country wanting to learn her techniques. "We should start offering training courses," Joe said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. "Teach other people how to do what we do. It could be another revenue stream, and it would help spread these methods more widely." "You'd be good at that," Cole said, reaching over to take her hand. "You've certainly taught me everything I know." "We taught each other," Joe corrected. "You brought your own knowledge and experience, and together we created something better than either of us could have done alone." "That's what partnership is, Cole. That's what marriage is. 2 people making each other better." Cole brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, rough with work, but still the most beautiful hand he had ever held. They had been married for 12 years now, and he loved her more with each passing day. Not the desperate, consuming love of those early months, though that passion was still there when they needed it, but something deeper and more enduring. The love of knowing someone completely, of having been through fire together and emerged stronger for it, of building a life brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Giving up the chance for an easier life. You could have married someone in Philadelphia, lived in a nice house with servants, never had to worry about droughts or contracts or whether the horses would make it through another winter. Joe looked at him like he had lost his mind. Cole Bennett, you listen to me. I have never regretted a single moment of the life we've built together. Yes, it's been hard. Yes, there have been times when I was so tired I cried, or so scared I couldn't sleep. But this life is mine. I chose it, I built it, and I'm living it on my own terms with the man I love and the family we created together. That's worth more than all the servants and nice houses in the world. Don't ever doubt that. I don't, Cole said, pulling her close. I just want to make sure you're happy. I'm happy, Joe said firmly. I'm exhausted and sore and I probably smell like horses, but I'm happy, Cole. So happy it scares me sometimes because I keep waiting for something to come along and take it all away. Nothing's going to take this away from us, Cole promised. Though he knew he couldn't really promise that, not in a world where accidents happened and illness struck without warning and life was fundamentally uncertain. But he could promise to fight for what they had built, to protect it and nurture it and do everything in his power to make sure their family thrived. We've worked too hard and come too far to lose it now. Elizabeth came running up to the porch then, her dress dirty and her hair falling out of its braids, holding something cupped carefully in her hands. Mama, Papa, look, I found a baby rabbit, can we keep it? Joe and Cole exchanged a glance, the kind of silent communication that came from years of partnership, and Cole knew they were both thinking the same thing. Their daughter, so fierce and wild and loving, had her mother's gift with animals and her father's soft heart. She would grow up to be extraordinary, as would Thomas, who was already showing signs of his Uncle Daniel's breeding expertise. Their family was growing and changing, and Cole realized that this was the real legacy they were building, not just the ranch but the children who would carry forward the values they had tried to instill. The belief that hard work and kindness and courage could create something beautiful in even the harshest places. Let's see what we can do, Joe said, and Elizabeth beamed as she climbed up onto the porch to show them her find. The seasons turned, one after another, marking the passage of time in the familiar rhythms of ranch life. Springs brought new foals and the backbreaking work of training. Summers brought the heat, and the constant struggle to keep everything watered and alive. Falls brought the contracts, and the sales and the satisfaction of seeing their horses go out into the world. Winters brought the cold and the quiet and the time to rest and repair and prepare for the next year. Cole found that he liked the rhythm of it, the way each season had its own character and challenges, the way his life was no longer a straight line stretching out into an unknown future but a circle, returning each year to familiar patterns while still moving forward. He had stopped thinking about leaving, stopped feeling that restless itch that had once driven him from place to place. This was home, these people were his family, and he had everything he needed right here. Thomas turned 15 the year Elizabeth turned 13, and Daniel and Sarah's oldest child, a son named James, was 11. The ranch was full of life and noise and love, exactly what Cole had never let himself dream of when he was younger. He watched his son work with a difficult horse one afternoon, using the techniques Joe had taught him, speaking in that same calm, patient voice she used, and Cole felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He's going to be better at this than either of us, Joe said, coming to stand beside him at the corral fence. He's got your patience and my instincts, that's a powerful combination. He's got your courage too, Cole said. Both our kids do, they're not afraid of anything. They're afraid, Joe corrected. They've just learned that being afraid doesn't mean you stop trying. That's the real lesson, Cole. Not that brave people aren't scared, but that they do the thing anyway. Cole slipped his arm around his wife's waist and pulled her close, and they stood there together watching their son work, the late afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold. This was the moment he would remember when he was old, Cole thought. Not the big dramatic moments, but this quiet peace, this sense of rightness, this knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both welcome and challenging. Daniel took over more of the day-to-day operations as Cole and Joe gradually stepped back, not retiring but shifting their focus to the parts of the work they loved most. Joe spent more time developing new training techniques and less time on the business side of things. Cole focused on mentoring the younger hands they hired, passing on everything he had learned over the decades. Their children grew into adults who made them proud. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a practical woman who shared his love of horses and the land. They built a house on the western edge of the ranch and started their own family, continuing the legacy. Elizabeth, true to her wild nature, traveled for a few years before settling down, working on various ranches throughout the West, learning different techniques and approaches. When she finally came home at 23, she brought with her a wealth of knowledge and a young veterinarian she had met in Colorado. They married a year later, and suddenly, the Wright Bennett operation had its own veterinary expertise, which proved invaluable. Cole and Joe became grandparents, then grandparents multiple times over, their house filling with the sounds of children and grandchildren whenever holidays rolled around. Cole found that he loved being a grandfather, loved the way he could spoil the little ones and then send them home to their parents, loved watching his own children navigate the challenges of parenthood with varying degrees of success and humor. On his 50th birthday, Cole stood on the porch of the house he had called home for more than half his life and looked out over the ranch that had grown from Joe's desperate dream into a thriving, multi-generational enterprise. The barn had been expanded twice. There were now 6 houses on the property sheltering various family members, and the corrals and pastures stretched as far as he could see. Dozens of horses grazed in the evening light, their coats gleaming, and Cole could pick out bloodlines going back to that wild Mustang Joe had tamed Barefoot in the corral all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Joe asked, coming out to join him. She was 51 now, her hair threaded with silver, her face lined with wrinkles earned from years of sun and laughter and worry. She was the most beautiful thing Cole had ever seen. "I'm thinking about the day I met you," Cole said. "How I almost rode right past this place. How close I came to missing out on everything that matters." "But you didn't," Joe said, leaning into his side. "You stayed. You were brave enough to stay." "You made it easy," Cole said. "From that first moment, watching you with Ghost, I knew you were meant for me. I didn't understand it then, didn't have words for it, but I knew. Something in my soul recognized something in yours." "I felt it too," Joe admitted. "I was so scared to let you in, so sure that you would leave like everyone else had left, but you proved me wrong, Cole. You stayed through everything, the hard times and the good times, and you never once made me regret trusting you." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and then Joe said, "Do you ever think about what comes next? We're not young anymore. Eventually, we're going to have to think about slowing down even more, maybe letting the kids take over completely." "I think about it," Cole admitted. "But I'm not ready yet. I still love the work, love being part of this. When it's time to step back, I'll know, but that time isn't now." "Good," Joe said, "because I'm not ready either. I want to keep training horses until my body won't let me anymore. I want to wake up every morning and know that I'm going to spend my day doing what I love with the person I love. That's not too much to ask, is it?" "It's not too much to ask," Cole agreed. "And if I have anything to say about it, we'll be doing exactly that for another 30 years. They did continue working, though at a gentler pace, for another 15 years. Cole was 65, and Joe was 66, when they finally decided to fully retire from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. By then, Thomas was running the breeding program, Elizabeth and her husband were managing the veterinary side of things, and Daniel's son James was overseeing the training operation. The ranch had expanded beyond anything they had imagined, was now one of the premier horse operations in what had become the state of New Mexico. Cole and Joe moved into a smaller house on the property, a cozy place with a view of the mountains and a porch perfect for sitting and watching the world go by. They spent their days reading, working in a small garden, visiting with their many grandchildren and growing number of great-grandchildren. It was a peaceful life, a far cry from the frantic, exhausting years of building the ranch, but Cole found that he didn't miss the chaos. He had done what he set out to do, had built something lasting with the woman he loved, and now he could rest in the satisfaction of a life well lived. On a warm spring evening when Cole was 72 and Joe was 73, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Cole's joints ached in a way they never had when he was young, and Joe moved more slowly than she once had, but they were still here, still together, still in love after nearly 50 years of marriage. "You remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Joe asked suddenly. Cole thought back across the decades to that conversation on the porch of the old house. "I said I loved you. I said I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. You said you were a drifter with no property and no money," Joe said. "You said you weren't much of a catch." "I was wrong about that last part," Cole said with a smile. "Turned out I was exactly the catch you needed." Joe laughed, that same wonderful laugh that had been one of the first things Cole loved about her. "You were exactly what I needed. A partner who saw me as an equal, who wasn't threatened by my strength, who was willing to work beside me instead of trying to control me. Do you know how rare that is, Cole? How lucky we were to find each other." "I know," Cole said softly. "I think about it every day. How different my life would have been if I hadn't stopped to watch you work that day. How empty and meaningless it would have felt, just drifting from place to place with no purpose, no connection, no love." "We saved each other," Joe said, echoing what she had said so many years ago on a different porch. "You gave me the partner I needed to build this ranch, and I gave you a reason to stop running. We created something beautiful together, Cole, not just the ranch, but our family, our life. I wouldn't change a single thing about it." Cole reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlocking in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "Neither would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Bennett. Watching you tame that wild Mustang Barefoot, I knew right then you were meant for me, and I was right." "Yes, you were," Joe agreed, squeezing his hand. "And I'm so grateful you had the courage to act on it, to stay, to build this life with me. I love you, Cole. Today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," Cole said. "Forever." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, horses nickering to each other, children laughing, the comfortable sounds of a large, loving family. Cole thought about the scared, lonely young man he had been when he first rode into Redemption, New Mexico territory, 50 years ago. That man would never have believed he could have this, all of this, the love and the family, and the sense of belonging that made every breath worthwhile. But Joe had taught him to be brave enough to stay, to fight for what mattered, to believe that he was worthy of love and happiness. She had given him everything, and in return, he had given her his whole heart, his complete devotion, his steadfast presence through every trial and triumph. Together, they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and hard work and the belief that courage and kindness could create beauty even in the harshest places. Cole Bennett had finally found his home, and it was not a place but a person. This remarkable woman who had tamed not just wild Mustangs, but also his restless, wounded heart. And as they sat together under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Cole knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, where he had always been meant to be. From the moment he first saw her standing barefoot in that corral with nothing but raw courage and grace between her, and 1,500 pounds of wild fury. This was love, he thought. Not the dramatic passion of youth, though that had been wonderful in its own way, but this deep, abiding connection that had been tested and refined over decades. This knowledge that no matter what came, they would face it together. This peace that came from knowing you had found your person, your partner, your home. The years that remained to them were gentle ones. They watched their grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, saw the ranch continue to thrive under the capable hands of the next generation. They took walks together in the cool of the morning, sat on their porch in the evening, and lived each day with the gratitude of people who knew how precious and fleeting life could be. Cole was 81 when Jo passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hand in his, after a brief illness that even Elizabeth's husband's veterinary expertise and knowledge of medicine could not cure. Cole held her as she slipped away, whispering his love, promising that he would be along when it was his time, that this was not goodbye but simply, until we meet again. Her loss left a hole in his heart that nothing could fill, but Cole took comfort in the knowledge that he had been blessed beyond measure to have had her in his life for 60 years. He had loved her with everything he had, and she had loved him in return, and that love had created ripples that would continue long after they were both gone. Cole lived another 3 years, surrounded by his family, still sharp and present despite his advanced age. He spent his days telling stories to his great-grandchildren about their remarkable great-grandmother, about the woman who had tamed wild Mustangs barefoot and built an empire through sheer determination and skill. He made sure they all knew about her courage, her kindness, her refusal to let the world tell her what she could and could not do. On a spring morning very much like the one when he had first arrived at the Broken Bit Ranch so many years ago, Cole Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face, at the age of 84. His children and grandchildren gathered to mourn him, but also to celebrate the incredible life he had lived, the love he had shared with Jo, and the legacy they had built together. They buried him next to Jo on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue and vast it seemed to stretch into infinity. The entire family gathered, 3 generations of Wright Bennetts, along with friends and neighbors and people whose lives had been touched by Cole and Jo's work over the decades. The preacher spoke about love and legacy, about 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. But the best eulogy came from Thomas, their oldest son, now a grandfather himself, who stood at his father's grave and said, "My father once told me that the day he saw my mother tame a wild Mustang barefoot, he knew she was meant for him. He said something in his soul recognized something in hers, and he was brave enough to act on it, to stay instead of drifting on like he had his whole life. That decision, that moment of courage, created all of this." He gestured to the ranch spread out below them, to the family gathered around them. "Everything we have, everything we are, started because my father was brave enough to stay and my mother was brave enough to trust him. That's the legacy they left us. Not just this ranch, but the knowledge that love and courage and hard work can create something that lasts, something that matters. We're all here because of them, and we carry them forward in everything we do." As the sun set that evening, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the family gathered on the porch of the main ranch house, sharing stories and memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. The horses grazed peacefully in the pastures, the next generation of foals frolicking on spindly legs, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote began its evening song. The Wright Bennett horse farm would continue for generations to come, a living testament to the love between a drifting cowboy and a determined woman who tamed wild Mustangs barefoot. Their story would be told and retold, becoming part of the family mythology, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, fight for what matters, and trust that love is worth the risk. And if on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the desert sage and the stars shone bright overhead, the ranch hands sometimes claimed they could see two figures sitting together on the porch of the old house, hands intertwined, looking out over the land they had built together. Well, nobody questioned it too closely. Some loves were too strong to be contained by something as simple as death, and the love between Cole and Josephine Bennett was exactly that kind of love. It was a love that had started with a moment of recognition, of one soul seeing another and knowing with absolute certainty that they had found their home. It had grown through years of hard work and shared dreams, been tested by trials and strengthened by triumphs, and ultimately created something that would last long after both of them were gone. Cole Bennett had ridden into Redemption, New Mexico territory on a hot July day in 1883, a drifter with no ties and no future. He had watched Josephine Wright tame a wild Mustang Barefoot, and in that moment, his entire life had changed. He had found his purpose, his home, his love, and he had been brave enough to reach for it with both hands and never let go. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. Not the ranch or the money or the reputation they had built, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. That was the true legacy of Cole and Josephine Bennett, a love story written in the dust and sweat and endless blue skies of the New Mexico desert, a testament to the power of courage and determination, and two hearts that recognized each other as home. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, each new child learning the techniques that Joe had developed, carrying forward the philosophy that animals deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. The family grew and spread, some staying on the ranch, others taking those lessons out into the wider world, but all of them carrying with them the knowledge that they came from people who had built something extraordinary through love and hard work. And sometimes, on spring evenings when the air was soft and the light was golden, when the horses were settled in their stalls and the work of the day was done, the current generation of Wright Bennetts would gather on one of the many porches scattered across the property and tell the story of how it all began. They would talk about the cowboy who had the courage to stay and the woman who had the strength to build her dream. And they would remember that every good thing they had came from that one moment of recognition. When Cole Bennett watched Joe Wright tame a wild Mustang Barefoot and knew with absolute certainty that she was meant for him, and he for her, from that day forward until the end of time and beyond.